Welcome to episode 76 of the Cygnal Pulse Pod. Today we're joined by Chris Lane, Cygnal pollster and partner. And we're going to be discussing our April National Voter Trends Survey. April 1st to the 3rd, we interviewed 1,500 likely 2026 voters. I almost said Republican primary there, but no, just regular general election voters. And so today we're going to cover takeaways from this poll, a couple new segments that we're going to introduce. So give us some feedback if you like it or not. And then wrap up with our winners and losers lightning round. So stick around. We're going to kick off with the hottest topic of the week, and probably to anyone in the world, especially if you're China right now, is Trump's tariffs. So, Chris, a couple things here that were really interesting in the survey. It was kind of mixed. Like, I've seen surveys that show tariffs are really popular. I've seen surveys that show tariffs are not popular, but ours basically showed that 80% of Republicans believe that tariffs are necessary to balance trade, or I'm combining these two, or they don't know, but they trust Trump's leadership. So big Republican number there. And then on the other side, you've got, Democrats obviously in the other direction on that, but kind of independent split, 41% tariffs are probably okay, 53% saying that they're bad for the economy. What was your take on all this?
Well, first off, good to be with you here today. I think this is probably the best example we've had in a long time of something we say to our clients constantly, which is polling is a snapshot in time. And just to reiterate to folks, this poll was April 1st to the 3rd before the market has done what it's done in the last week.
It was like right in the middle of Liberation Day, right?
The timing is kind of impeccable. So when we talk to people about how quickly things change and why you need to poll so often, this is why, because the world has changed drastically in that period of time. But we have what we have to work off of, right? And right before all of this happened, we did see this overwhelming support from Republicans of, what President Trump's trying to accomplish, and largely along partisan lines, to be honest, too. The other thing I found really interesting was just this narrative that, President Trump's support is falling from underneath him. And there's just not one single number that supports that
on
claim.
Our trend line, it's like this.
It's as steady as it could possibly be. In fact, his favorables today are higher than they were on election day. So, the media is doing precisely what they tried to do in term one and try to cut his legs from underneath him time and time and time again. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is the fact that these hits are simply not working.
It's coming from a Massachusetts Republican, people here. Trump has landed the plane here with this Republican. One thing of note, that I was looking at this is we've got a segment in the heat map of people where it says switch to Trump. And that was folks who voted for Biden in 20 and then voted for Trump in 24. And then one step further, they're telling us they're going to vote and participate in the 26 election. So not a huge group, but a statistically relevant sized group in the crosstabs here. About 3.3% of voters within the survey here. And this group right here, interestingly enough, 58% are on the I'm with Trump or I think tariffs are good. Only 35% are saying bad. And so you start to see this narrative being built around tariffs in that, one, I don't think anybody knows it. It hasn't personally impacted anybody unless you needed to take out 100% of your retirement in the last 5 days. It hasn't physically impacted anybody. They're not noticing it at the pump, or if they are, it's probably going down because oil's crashing. But as you look at these groups that kind of matter moving forward in the political landscape, the ones that matter are definitely behind Trump on this issue, which is why I think he has so much confidence and gravitas to just keep with it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. If we remember back to Trump versus Biden part 1 in 2020, those swing voters went for Joe Biden about 2-1 in swing districts across this country. Now, of course, there's difference in different places, but then that same group of voters in 2024, the majority of them voted for Donald Trump. So when you talk about those switching voters, that 3.4%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but in swing districts, that's enormous.
Yeah.
Especially when they almost flipped 2/3, 1/3 from one side to the other.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about these close races, that's a huge amount. And when we're talking nationally, that's millions of voters. So it's super important that we keep that in mind. The other thing I would say here is low-income Americans feel better about the direction of the country today with Donald Trump, with what he's doing around tariffs, than they did at any point during Joe Biden's last 2 years. I just want to repeat that. The low income Americans feel better about what President Trump is doing than at any point during the Biden administration. So the idea that Trump is losing this sort of support with this group of voters is just simply not true. It's not based in fact. It's not based in reality.
When if you look at the diploma divide of that really defines partisanship now in the complete opposite way as it defined partisanship 20, 30, 40 years ago. When you look at this new Republican base, they're more hurt by international trade and globalization in their job, in their ability to provide for their family. Now, can they get a cheaper TV? Yes. Can they provide for their family as much? No. And the elites, the folks who now make up, the coastal Democrats, because they're so concentrated in these areas, they profit from the stock market. So I think it's really interesting that Trump spent his whole first term talking about the stock market, and now he's not talking about it at all, as opposed to just like get over it, wait, be patient, which is, I think, the exact right approach for him in this. Another fact of this is you've got the fact that 44% of the country is still optimistic about the direction of the country, which is way better than almost any point in the entire Biden administration. And so, the media tends to just like pick and choose what it thinks is important and makes Trump look bad. And they ignore a whole lot of numbers that show that's not actually happening. I went in and looked too, Chris, at the people who said inflation or economy is their top issue. And it's up from March, 4% with women, 6% with folks who make less than $50,000 a year. It's the highest since the summer of 23. And of people who say this is the issue, and this is kind of the flip side of it, if they say inflation and economy is their top issue, it's now 51% Republican, 41% Democrat on a generic ballot, which has tightened significantly since even last month. It also, people who say that's their top issue, Trump's fave is only at 50 fave, 49 unfave now. That's a big drop. So it's not like we're here defending everything, because there are a couple data points to look at and say if somebody is saying that inflation or economy is a key issue for them, they are kind of coming off of Republicans at this point.
For sure. And this is where we get into this game of, does the economy represent the stock market, and does the stock market represent the economy? And of course, those things are intertwined. But the bottom 50% of America's earners by wealth own about 1% of the stock market. So we're talking about an enormous group of voters, mostly Trump voters, who are almost unfazed by what's happening in the stock market. So
yeah, I think I saw something that it was like 8% of Americans own 70% of equities.
Yeah. And in fact, the top 1% own 50% of the stock market.
Yeah. So it's the inverse.
Yeah. It's just, it's not a good indication of how things are going. Now, I'll call it hypocrisy where hypocrisy exists. During the Biden years, you could not turn on Fox News without hearing someone, blame Joe Biden about the positioning of the stock market. So, everyone's trying to have it both ways right now. And there's a lot of hypocrisy in that. But the fact of the matter is that low-income Americans are not particularly worried about what's happening with the stock market right now for two reasons. One, they're either not invested in it, or two, we haven't seen the impact. And I think anyone who tells you how this is going to play out is kidding themselves.
Well, a group that really matters is Hispanic men. I mean, they made a big difference for Donald Trump in the 24 election. They're kind of the backbone of non-white voters moving to Trump. Really, it's just non-white males more so than anything else, but especially Hispanic males. 54% favorability or approval of Donald Trump's job. I mean, if you're putting together a coalition, Donald Trump's doing it the right way, saying the right things, doing the right things, and kind of lighting people's hair on fire in the process.
So this was my biggest takeaway from our national survey. Even with all the gains that Donald Trump had made last year with Hispanic voters, when Donald Trump took office, 29% of Hispanics felt like the country was heading in the right direction. Just 29%. That was in January. In February, it was 34%. In March, it was 39%. Now it's 46% of Hispanic voters thinks the country's going the right direction.
At the time, the media would be telling you to be going the opposite direction.
Exactly right. So now there's an equal amount of Hispanic voters, 46% on each side, that will tell you that the country is either headed in the right direction or on the wrong track. 3 months ago, the day Trump took office, that number was about 35 points underwater. And now it's dead zero. That is enormous movement. And this, again, after a large reason Trump won Nevada, Arizona, and some key swing states is how much he had already gained with that group. So imagine where that right direction, wrong track was.
That number.
2, 3, 8, 10 years ago for Republicans generally.
Yeah.
This is a seismic shift that the Democrats should be extremely worried about.
Well, demographics is destiny, which is what the Democrats used to say to their benefit. Now it's actually to Republicans' benefit. Let's switch topics here and talk about the blame game. So who are voters blaming for what's going on? How are they specifically viewing Democrats? And we put a question in here. One, you can go to our website, cygn.al, and actually see all these results with heat maps and analysis. But specifically, we asked about Doge. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of it? We won't talk about that today, but it's on there for people to take a look at. It's not as bad as the media would make it out to be. But we did ask about waste, fraud, and abuse within programs, specifically Social Security and Medicaid, because, Elon Musk and Donald Trump's kind of whole gist is that we can cut out hundreds of billions of dollars of waste, fraud, and abuse, which means we can continue to pay the benefits or increase benefits, whatever it is, but at least not take people's benefits away. There was a big partisan divide on this. What did you see there?
Yeah, this is, again, where I think Democrats continue to miss the mark with mainstream America, because there were presidents named Obama and Clinton who had very similar ideas to try to cut down waste, fraud, and abuse. And Democrats overwhelmingly supported those programs, as they should. I don't understand a world in which we have to live where cutting down on waste, fraud, and abuse is somehow a bad idea. Sort of off topic, but just to speak to this really quickly. As we discussed earlier, Trump's favorables are as good as they have ever been and continue to be as good as they ever been. And I think Elon Musk has almost served as some sort of shield for Donald Trump, because the bashing of Trump day after day for a decade has gotten old and tiresome, and the hits aren't landing. So the media has needed a new punching bag, and Elon Musk has become that punching bag in so many ways. And
seems to be fine with it.
He seems to be fine with it. I don't know if Tesla stockholders are fine with it, but that's a different conversation.
Pumped yesterday.
They
might have dumped today, but it pumped yesterday.
For sure. But I think there's almost a brilliant play here where Trump is able to, continue to go down his road because the media is so fascinated with Elon Musk and everything he's working on right now.
We have his fav unfav in there too, if people want to check it out.
We do. And we've been tracking it for a while now. And if anyone's unfavorable has gone up, it's Elon Musk's, not Donald Trump's.
So on the waste, fraud, and abuse piece here, what was interesting is that almost half of Democrats denied that there was any in there at all. And, when you look at people who are saying, yes, there's waste, fraud, and abuse, and it will impact benefits, it's more likely to be male than female voters, which I found interesting. Independents, 60% agree with that, and only 32% said there is no waste, fraud, and abuse. I agree we need more messaging on this, but going back to the Hispanics, 76% said, yes, waste, fraud, and abuse is there and it's impacting benefits. Only 16% said, no, there's no waste, fraud, and abuse there. And I just, these voter coalitions that the Democrats have historically had are starting to align with Republicans on these issues, and Democrats are being left holding the bag on the 20-30% side of issues. And I think this is one of them.
And that's where Trump has been masterful, is finding these 80-20 issues, and Democrats are going to take the 20 side against Trump because they just like to be against Trump, and then they lose out on these swing voters because of this issue. Let me flip this on you for 1 second and see what you think. Let's pretend we lived in a world, and let's not go down this path too far, that Kamala Harris had won in November, and we asked the same question about waste, fraud, and abuse. Do you think we would have got a drastically different answer?
I think it's hard to answer that question because if it's not in the media, it doesn't show up in polls.
Right.
And we see this all the time. You can go back and look at the trend line on our top issue question, which is, I think, like slide 8 in the deck here. And the peak at which illegal immigration was really growing as a top issue, you could overlay that exactly with how many times it was mentioned or shown on television.
For sure.
And that as it became on television less and less, then it drops in importance as an issue. And so, I mean, it's a long answer to your question, but thank God I don't have to live in that world.
Right.
But secondly, if nobody's talking about it, I don't know how these questions would turn out. I think you'd see a higher undecided, for example, on that.
So let me follow up that just as far as our top issues are concerned, because we did see once again in our poll that inflation in the economy is our number one issue. And
It's grown the past 4 months.
Right. And I think in part, and I'm curious your thought on this, is illegal immigration continues to go down in importance drastically. I mean, peaking at almost the number one issue overall, regardless of party affiliation last year during the election. And so as that issue becomes less prevalent, as the perception is that President Trump is solving this issue, that creates a vacuum of what's going to replace that. And right now we are mostly seeing inflation in the economy. What do you think happens in the next 3, 6, 9 months and into the 26 cycle with that vacuum, as this not becomes much less an issue? It has been for a very long time now.
Well, voters don't really vote based on economic policy because nobody understands the economy. Like, anybody who claims to understand the economy is lying. Even economists are lying. Like, they have theories, but they don't truly understand it. So the economy is a really challenging issue for voters because they only can base their experience of the economy in the importance of the issue. So if you feel prices going up, you see prices going up, you're going to say the economy sucks. But if you see them going down and it's less expensive to fill up your car and to buy groceries, you're going to say the economy's going well, even if there's tons of other economic indicators saying things are bad.
Right.
And so it's hard to come up with an economic policy and say, this is my policy. And people go, oh, great, I'll vote for you, because they have no clue if that policy is going to work at all. Unlike other issues, like Republicans are going to have to do something on this and start making prices drop.
Right.
Or you're going to have some frustrated voters on your hands because we don't have another scapegoat issue on the right or for the center like we had with the illegal immigration issue.
Totally true. And at some point, that's where I think our candidates and our party really needs to be focused on what that 26 messaging looks like, because that's going to be out of the equation. A lot of the craziness on social issues that Democrats were pushing are no longer going to be on the table in the same manner. When
I think we should make them on the table.
Well, yeah, and in certain places, absolutely. But when Republicans hold the White House and hold the Senate and hold the House, and have acted on these issues, they're just not going to pack the same punch that they did last time around. And certainly in state legislatures, it still does. And I think we've talked about in the past, on and off air, of legislators, particularly state legislators, not being willing to take on these issues, particularly in blue and purple states and swing districts, because they get a little nervous. But the fact of the matter is that overwhelmingly, particularly on the transgender issue in sports, the public is on their side, even in the bluest places.
Well, and it's why here we continue to see the Democrats' image just fall apart.
Right.
Like, I really thought we would see a leveling off this month. Anytime we do a survey, I always start out with a script and I read it and I have a theory on each question of how it's going to come back.
Right.
And that really drives my analysis of what's going on. If something happens exactly like I thought it would happen, I'm probably not going to write about it much. But if it's higher or lower than I expected or totally different than I expected, that's where I really start to dig in.
Right.
And my theory was the Democrats couldn't get any worse. But you know what? The Democrats have gotten worse. And they're up to -15 net image now, which means you take favorable minus unfavorable. So you get -15 there. And then among independents, we've had a net 19% negative shift. I was looking at a couple other groups here. Union households from December, they had a 51% favorable, 46% unfavorable. That's flipped to 45-51. That's an 11-point shift among union households. I looked at under $100,000 voters a year from that same time period, an 8-point shift. And that, like, Democrats keep picking things that are hurting them even more. But you still got that hatred enough of Trump that they're still in the game, despite that poor image and continually worsening image.
For a party that claims they hate Donald Trump, I'm very curious what the Democrats will do when President Trump leaves office, because they're going to have to totally rework their messaging, because the only thing that has worked for them for the better part of a decade is go after the bad orange man. And they're going to have to come up with a platform that actually means something to people, because what we see in our messaging time and time again, and what we see in our top priorities time and time again, is independents and swing voters look a whole lot more like Republicans than they do Democrats. Yeah. And that's,
you see that in our segmentation analysis almost every survey.
Every single time. And shame on Democrats for not having any vision to try to dig themselves out of this hole.
Yeah, completely agree. Let's go back to Hispanic voters here, because you would assume that Hispanic voters have a soft spot for immigration issues, but they actually tend to be the hardest people on this topic.
No doubt.
79% of Hispanic voters believe illegal immigrants have broken the U.S. law by coming here illegally. According to Democrats, you got a fourth of them who disagree with this. Like, how do you see this aligning with our broader messaging on the topic, even though we've already said the topic's kind of waned?
It's just so consistent to what we've been seeing for years now. And particularly in Hispanic majority districts across the country, we have always seen that the people most for legal immigration are Hispanic voters. I mean, imagine you do everything right. You follow the rules. You do exactly what you're supposed to do. You do the hard work. You do the hard path. And then someone else gets the same benefit you do, just
or more.
Yeah, for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Imagine how frustrating that must be.
I think it goes to, in messaging in general, you've got to focus on principles, not policies.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to get people to agree on the principle of something than it is the specifics.
Yeah. And that's where we talk a lot to our clients about, emotion driving decision making and emotion driving voters. And there's, fear and anger tend to be those top two emotions.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what could induce more anger than an issue like this. And that's where, Republicans, by doing the right thing, have been rewarded on this issue quite a bit.
We asked some questions about judges in here because there's been a lot of conversation about, should a circuit, and I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but like, should a judge in one region of the country be able to stop a law nationally? Or is that the Supreme Court's job? Logically, I would say yes. But we asked a question and said, how much do you believe that political party affiliation of judges influences their opinions? Because judges everywhere in the country outside of Alabama Circuit Court, where you do run as a party, they're nonpartisan roles,
right?
Especially, federally, they're supposed to be nonpartisan. But obviously, these folks have partisan affiliation. So when you looked at this and saw it, what did you see related to Hispanic voters about this kind of judicial activism?
Yeah. So first and foremost, over 80% of voters believe overall that political party affiliation of judges influences their decisions. Over 80% said either a lot or some. That's a huge number. And
that has to hurt with trust of the judiciary.
Absolutely. And with Hispanic voters, it was even higher than that. It was 57% said a lot and 30% said some. So 87%, almost 9 out of 10 voters said a lot or some. And this is where I think Democrats and Republicans can actually agree on this, but for polar opposite reasons. I think the rulings regarding some of President Trump's executive orders has fired up Republican base because Democrat judges have decided that they're, the executive branch. And then at the exact same time, Democrats' perception of the Supreme Court is that it's become ultra partisan. So, taking our political hats off for 5 seconds and just, being Americans, this scares the hell out of me. Because if we lose faith in that and it becomes a left versus right issue rather than a law and order issue, I worry about the path that leads us down. And Republicans are definitely even more concerned about this than Democrats. But the truth is that an overwhelming amount of Democrats, Republicans, and independents all kind of feel this way.
Well, and it was all started by Democrats. I mean, they're the ones who were attacking the court first. They're the ones talking about packing the court,
for sure.
Like FDR attempted to do in the 30s. And I think this is going to come back to bite them in the butt when faith is lost in the judiciary. And that was their last hope. It was their last hope in redistricting. You look at the 2021 redistricting process that continues today. We're on like third rounds of redistricting in certain states versus 2010s.
Yeah.
They decided we're just going to use the courts for everything. And I think they're going to eventually find out that doesn't play in favor. And then they're left with no trust in any branch of government.
So how many times just in our lifetime have we been told that this is the most important election of our lifetime? But if you look back at that 2016 election, it actually probably is the most true for that one because of the influence that election cycle had on the Supreme Court. And that's where, as a right-leaning person in this country, I couldn't be more grateful that turned out the way it did, because with everything that's happened, particularly on the social spectrum in the last decade, and how much drastic change has happened in that period of time, at least there has been a check and balance on, sanity. And
Well, let's swap topics here before we get to our winners and losers lightning round. And that is, we asked a question about trust or approval in various levels of government. So your mayor or township or village president, so kind of the closest to you, your local city council, your state legislator, and your member of Congress. It was really fascinating that every single one of them had really high approval, higher than anybody else's image that we tested within the survey here. What stuck out to you in this of these various levels of government and approval or disapproval?
yeah, I think part of it is the old notion, hate Congress, love your congressman type thing, right? And no one sees their person as part of the problem. And it's funny in our little DC bubble here, that's what you hear constantly, is the idea that, people aren't having real conversations anymore. And, that's what I would love to see happen as a, as you described me earlier, a Massachusetts Republican, which is an oxymoron within itself.
We love all three of you.
But yeah, no, that's where the more local the official, the higher the approval rating too, right? And something I have a conversation with state reps and state senators all the time is that state reps, despite the fact that they technically have a lower position, tend to always have a higher name ID and higher favorable than state senators, because it's a more intimate relationship between the voter and the representative. And so that came as no surprise to me. I don't know if you had anything to add there.
No, as I was writing notes and thinking through this, I just wrote down, quote, "my" as a powerful word.
Yeah, for sure.
That's, I don't like theirs, but my one is okay here.
Totally.
What was interesting is that as you went through these levels of government, from the closest to the furthest away from the person, with Congress being the furthest away, independents started to fall off on those. And I wonder what impact that has on the 26th election or elections moving forward in general, because this is something, and you and I've talked about this before, that in 22, when we were seeing polling in these competitive seats, independents would be a plurality for Republicans. And then when you did postmortems in these seats, you saw that Republicans actually lost independents. And what we ascertained is that there was a bunch of folks saying that they were going to vote and had voting history, and they were independents and they were going to vote for the Republican, and they didn't show up to the election. And I just wonder if these independents are frustrated at what's going on nationally, but okay with what's going on locally. Like, do they stay out of the national elections in 26?
For sure. And the other dynamic at play there is, coming from a bluer place myself, we tend to like midterms because it's lower turnout, and Republicans have historically been better voters than Democrats and coming out in those elections. But now I'm beginning to wonder, and particularly in, this is the last time Donald Trump will have ever been on a ballot. And is there a group of voters?
So he says, once they work the third term thing out.
We're going to need like 40 more minutes to dive into that. And, the Constitution. But, does that group of voters stay engaged or not? Do they stay fired up? Do they continue to support Republican candidates or candidates in general? How does that faction get divided up or not?
You could also play devil's advocate and say, well, what about the Democrats who hate Donald Trump so much they're going to show up to every election that shows up at anything in the newspaper, as they're reading the physical newspaper and that says there's an election in 2 months, they're going to show up to that election for dog catcher and vote against the Donald Trump candidate. Like, is there also that aspect of it too, potentially?
For sure. And I also think the other thing that could happen here is if the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party continues to grow their influence, which it seems like it's trending in that direction, do, your conservative blue dog Reagan Democrat type folks fall off too?
Yeah.
So they have the same problem on the other side. It's going to be fascinating. I think modeling and turnout modeling heading into 26 might be the most important cycle it has ever had.
Well, and then therefore get out the vote efforts and actually investing in them. So
precisely.
Let's finish up here with winners and losers lightning round. Chris, one winner, one loser based on these poll results.
Yeah, this might come as a somewhat surprise. But my biggest winner here is Donald Trump's favorable. if you just watched the news and you just listened to what the media would tell you, Trump's honeymoon phase from what happened in Butler to the election, the lead up to the second term, has all just gone away. And there's just no evidence of that. And I talk to candidates all the time who are asking me, well, how far is it going to drop? How far is it going to drop? It hasn't dropped. It hasn't dropped at all.
Yeah. And this is of people who are going to vote in 26. And there's probably a large number of folks who voted for Trump in 24, and we may never see again at the polls.
Exactly right. And the big one, particularly in February and March, was all these buyer's remorse voters for Trump. It's like, well, I wanted the economy to get better, but now I'm regretting it. The numbers don't say that that's the truth.
Oh, the switch to Trump, and you can look on the very last slide of our deck and look at the demos of the people who switched to Trump. They're stronger than regular Republicans in pretty much all of our crosstabs.
They are. And a lot of them voted for Donald Trump for the very first time in 2024 after not voting for him in 16 or 20.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then my loser here is frankly that same group of media who have tried desperately to, have the same impact on the Trump presidency from 2017 to 2021.
You could almost say that they've hurt Democrats more than they've hurt Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump's faves stay here. Republican approval is pretty steady. It's the Democrats who've been getting the delta between fave and fave.
It's gotten so crazy. And, I think the best example is when you see something happened 4 years ago where the headline said one thing and then it happens under Trump and it says something drastically different. We've seen so many examples of that that people have just lost total faith.
Yeah.
And probably to a fault, right? But yeah, their punches are just not landing. And when
they're landing on the wrong,
they're hitting rubber and coming back and hitting themselves in the face. So good luck to them.
All right. My winner